Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Fronteras, a Changing America. I'm Anthony Moreno. On the program, we learn more about efforts to grow and support businesses in El Paso. Joining us now is Andrea Hutchins, who serves as President and CEO of the El Paso Chamber of Commerce. Andrea, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, wonderful to talk about this issue with you. You have completed your first year already, but
Yes.
First I'd like to hear a little bit more about the mission of the El Paso Chamber of Commerce.
Sure. So, first of all, before I get into our mission, I do have to say, you mentioned briefly that I've completed 1 year, and I have to give a huge shout out to my friends at the Las Cruces Chamber of Commerce and also MVITA. They have been instrumental in helping not only with projects in El Paso, but just being great partners. So I think partnership has really been kind of the cornerstone for the 1 year anniversary that we're now celebrating. So I appreciate being here and the opportunity to kind of share the mission of the chamber. Our Chamber of Commerce is not so different than other chambers. I like to tease people that chambers of commerce have been around since 1599 to protect businesses from the government. And I joke about that, but truly advocacy is at the heart of what any chamber of commerce does. So I think over the years, the chamber has kind of morphed to be more of a community development entity. So we don't only focus on what's good for businesses, but we also focus for prosperity for the region. So when we look at what prosperity means, it often involves people and places in addition to businesses.
Now, I'm glad you brought that up because we've heard that a lot from folks working in economic development and local businesses, as well as those partnerships and having that support. What is so unique about this area when it comes to that?
So obviously we are a little bit geographically isolated from some of our other partners, whether they be in, Texas or New Mexico. So I think that the partnerships here are unique because one, they're a necessity, but two, we really do have a very unique culture here. Being a border region, it is predominantly a Hispanic population, which brings with it its own very unique culture and history. And so some of those things that we are able to both embrace and then we may have as a challenge, which, our geographic isolation you can look at as an opportunity, but also as a challenge. I think it would not be without those partnerships that we would be seeing some of the success that we are.
You mentioned community development being key to the mission of your organization. What are some things that you really think are working when it comes to that initiative?
So I think that there are a lot of people post-pandemic who are very interested in seeing the communities around us succeed. I think one, taking advantage of the opportunity to bring together some of those voices to really look at how we can collectively, I'm gonna talk about partnerships and unity a whole lot, but even when it comes to transportation, when we go to the state capitol or when we go to Washington, D.C., and we're advocating for transportation dollars, we're often doing it as a much smaller metropolitan area, but when we unite our voices, that voice is so much louder. So when it comes to advocacy work, the things that we can do collectively really are expounded. I look at Fort Bliss and White Sands as a perfect example of that. There is a lot of good activity and a lot of really unique expansion that's happening in our region as a result of that. I know you may have seen, but UTEP has actually been one of the only recipients in the Southwest, if you will, for the Build Back Better initiative. And right now they are a finalist for a $160 million NSF grant. There's a lot of things that are happening quietly out here in our little corner of the United States. But like I said, I really do think it's those relationships and those collective voices that provide an opportunity post-pandemic for us to kind of make our mark, if you will, on the region and the country.
Yeah, you're talking about research being done in the area. How important is it to develop that relationship you have with higher institutions, like higher education institutions like UTEP, perhaps other higher education institutions in the area? Texas Tech also has a strong footprint in the area, to where you can really partner on various things. How do you see that impacting economic development in the area?
Sure. So we were a partner on the Build Back Better grant and will be hopefully on the NSF grant when it's announced. I look at the future not only of our workforce, which is something that is impacting businesses across the country. I don't think you can talk about business without talking about the workforce issues that we're having here. But when you talk about higher education, obviously there is a direct tie from higher education to the workforce, right? So those are going to be the graduates that are the future of our businesses across the country. And then when you talk about research, there's really some unique opportunities that our universities have right now to be catalysts for regional economic development. Our universities here in the region are maybe unlike others where they are also partnering even across state lines, so that's really unique and interesting to see. But when you think about what you saw during the pandemic, crisis usually breeds opportunity, right? And so there was a lot of opportunity for bringing business back to the United States, also to refocus on research. When you look at the big booms and busts that we've had as a country, they've often been around some sort of a crisis followed by some sort of a renaissance. And right now we're seeing a renaissance not only when it comes to supply chain and bringing things back home, but also making new and unique and diverse products right here in the United States. So I think a lot of the investment that you're going to be seeing from both universities and federal government, state government, even local governments in research and technology and really spurring that technology, I think you're going to see that at a regional level, and I think we're ahead of the game there.
You've mentioned workforce issues already. When I've talked to folks who are working in economic development, those professionals working on supporting businesses in the area and bringing in new businesses to the area, some of the things that they've brought up before have been a lack of soft skills, education, of course, having an educated workforce, and quality of life as well is something that executives ask before they decide to invest in the region. Are these still major issues that you're facing, and are there any other issues that you're dealing with as well?
So they are still issues that we're facing, but I think they're all almost positive because they're relatively quick fixes, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Often people find that there is an amazing quality of life here, that they are just uneducated or perceiving other national views, if you will, about what the border might look like, right? But we know differently as a border community that we have so much unique culture, talent, resources, things to do, shows, operas. I mean, I could go on and on. So I think very quickly people learn that there is an amazing quality of life here and an amazing cost of living right here in our region. So I think that's put to bed just with some education. I think when it comes to the talent issue, where you talk about soft skills and education, those are relatively easy fixes. You just need training programs. We have great education institutions like we've already addressed. And often many of them have, programs that are either low cost or no cost for the user and sometimes reduced cost for the businesses. Either way, if you have the people in a region, you can often train them to do what you need. That is where we stand out apart from a majority of the rest of the country. When you look at the average age in our region, it's between 28 and 32, depending on the exact area that you're looking at. There are places in the Midwest and in the Northeast where that average age is as high as 46. So if you can consider how difficult it is to be able to get thousands of people to relocate to a region versus being able to send somebody to community college for 18 months to get them up on their skills, I think it's a no-brainer where the future of the workforce is, and companies are going to be able to see that just based on the basic demographics in the region.
So how well are state and federal lawmakers listening to the concerns that you have to ensure that you can continue with your role of economic development in the borderland?
Sure. So I will tell you, I think we are extremely blessed that the two representatives who represent our region in El Paso and Las Cruces are extremely progressive and have a lot of forethought and insight when it comes to listening to the business community. They're very pro-business, and we believe that we have a good relationship with them. I'd like to continue to see that prosper. Now, I will tell you that there are other politicians who may think differently of the border. There's a huge issue right now across the country with very partisan politics. I think that's something that we all see. However, one of the big issues that we have continued to really hone in on is immigration. So immigration is a partisan issue, but it shouldn't be. And I think that as we continue to have those workforce issues that we were just discussing, I think that some of the states that have declining and aging populations that we discussed, I think they are going to demand that the federal government do more. I can tell you that there is already some state-led legislation reform that is coming out of the states of Indiana and Utah, that governors should be the ones to administer visas because there has been such a difficult time at the federal level being able to move that needle. Now, I can also tell you that our Congresswoman in El Paso, Congresswoman Veronica Escobar, has a bipartisan legislation that she has developed. It's called the Dignity Act. It's a relatively lengthy document, but she covers all aspects of immigration reform. It's very comprehensive, and it is bipartisan. So when we look at the border leading the way on immigration, as it should, I really think it's going to take those northern states demanding immigration reform because their population is going to require it.
Now, when you have those conversations, I mean, how do you get past the rhetoric?
So I think, sometimes you have to meet people where they are. Believe it or not, I'll give you an example. The state of Missouri had immigration as one of their number one issues, immigration and border security. And when you look at Missouri, it's a relative distance from the border. And so I think part of that is from fear-mongering from, specific politicians or news outlets. I think part of it is education, but I think part of it is also getting to meet people where they are. I think most of us would agree that we want to have a safe border. I think most of us would agree that we want a reduced amount of drugs in our country. All of the things that are necessary for having a secure and safe border. I think sometimes you have to have those discussions in order to move the needle on immigration discussions. I think most of us that live in this region realize that there is a distinct difference between the two issues. Most of the drugs that are coming over the border are not from immigrants and asylum seekers. They are from U.S. citizens and U.S. companies. That being said, you sometimes have to bring those fears and bring those issues to the table in order to move the needle on those big issues.
El Paso and the community of El Paso, local business owners in the area feel the impact of federal immigration policy. We've seen that this year already with the ending of Title 42 and the rise of migrants being dropped off in the city. What were your conversations like with local business owners in the area when that was happening?
So I think it depends on where they're located. Certainly there were some individuals that were more impacted from legitimate foot traffic, from people who were outside of kind of ground zero, if you will, of where the immigrant crisis was. I will tell you though, the end of Title 42 and May 12th was relatively flat, in my opinion. I know that, the news had things like the sky was going to be falling, and then very quickly you could tell that the weather forecast was wrong, basically, right? So when we look at, I think, communities like ours who are used to dealing with these type of issues, the rest of the country sees it as a news bite, and we see it as another day where this community comes together, we pull together the resources that we need. And when you talk about things at a federal level, I mean, obviously the funding here locally is an issue. But I will tell you, even beyond that, I think that the bigger issue is the misinformation campaign impacting our economy. I cannot tell you how many times I will travel and people will kind of whisper, is it safe there? Or we will be talking to a business or a potential candidate to fill a high-level position, wanting them to move to our region, and they are legitimately scared. I actually had a conversation with somebody that believed that their baby was going to get trafficked out of a daycare. That's how bad some of these fears nationally are. And so when I look at the impact on our economy, when people have that type of fear and just misinformation that's rampant, I feel like that almost will have a bigger and longer term impact on our economy than the monies that we spend on immigration.
Besides misinformation, I mean, what other challenges may local businesses in El Paso be dealing with right now?
Sure. So, I mean, obviously, we're all dealing with a supply chain issue. I was just talking to somebody earlier about the issue with transformers. That's not something that's just unique to our region. So, COVID was a major disruptor. I can also tell you, though, that some of the things that have come about because of the, the administration's investments have caused additional supply chain issues. Now, all of these things will work themselves out, but when you're a business and you're trying to get a dishwasher delivered to a customer, or if you are selling cars and you're trying to get the cars, not even worried about getting them off the lot, but you're trying to get the cars to your dealership, you're looking at what's happening right now. And so a lot of those supply chain issues continue to be an issue for businesses. Taxes are always an issue, obviously, for businesses, but I really do think that workforce is the number one thing that we hear about and most often. I think we, as I mentioned earlier, we are blessed to have a relatively young workforce. But again, I do think that we do struggle, just like other places in the United States, with having the right people and the right education in place. But the good thing is, and I mentioned this earlier, we do have a lot of really educated companies and organizations who I think can be able to fill that gap.
What seems to be working in addressing that workforce issue? I mean, and there's also a lot of competition out there for folks, especially when you're talking about wages and benefits and things like that. What things might be working?
Sure. So I think that companies are starting to see that the status quo is maybe not going to keep people here and keep employees engaged, right? I mean, employees do have options. So we're seeing, continued wage increase. It is starting to flatten here a little bit in the border region. We saw, I think, for about 18 months consecutive wage increases across the region. That is starting to flatten a little bit, but I do think that companies are doing things to be more, outside of the box when it comes to benefits. In certain industries, folks are still allowing employees to work from home, or they're putting together some sort of a hybrid situation. There is a big trend right now with companies that are paying off student loans. There is also, the increased desire and willingness for companies to increase the amount of PTO and also make schedules a little bit more flexible. Back in the day, and I'm sure probably when you first started working, it was 8 to 5, or this was your shift, and this is it, and we're sticking to it. I think a lot of companies are seeing that the more flexible that they can be, especially in certain industries where the job itself doesn't necessarily require that somebody be opening a door from 8 to 5. That flexibility is really key when it comes to attracting talent.
What about resources for businesses, for entrepreneurs in the area, so they can learn the information they need and get educated on how to have the best start and continue to thrive?
Sure. So, there's probably more resources out there than what people realize. There is a lot of money from the pandemic that created a lot of different programs. A lot of nonprofits had some resources that they weren't maybe, didn't have access to in the past, and created a lot of entrepreneurship programs out of those things. I can tell you that the SBA continues to diversify their product lines and the offerings that they have. People can go to SBA.org or SBDC.org and find a myriad of resources there. Obviously, your local Chamber of Commerce is a great resource as well. We do have a lot of training and coaching programs. There are more resources out there than I think people realize. Spending just maybe 5 minutes doing some Googling and looking and seeing what's out there is always a key thing. I think networking is also another really big opportunity that obviously chambers offer that as well. But you look at all of the different associations that are out there. A lot of money was put into these different programs during the pandemic to make sure that entrepreneurs were able to bounce back where appropriate, but then also if startups were interested in starting up, that they had access to resources and programs that were out there.
You've mentioned already about being engaged with our federal, state lawmakers in the area. Your organization recently had a legislative update. Can you share a little bit about what was discussed?
Sure. So we had the legislators from West Texas. So the 5 folks that represent El Paso. So they really looked at the 88th legislative session in Texas and kind of where we fleshed out in El Paso regarding projects, regarding funding, regarding just overall representation. I can tell you that they brought back several hundred millions of dollars in new infrastructure and programs. We're going to be getting a cancer center. We're going to be getting a new mental health facility. There's a lot regarding transportation, which is obviously impactful for the entire region. So that session was very, very, I think, successful for us. We're already looking at the 89th legislative session. So as you know, Texas only meets every other year. So we are going to be hopefully going in guns blazing, if you will, during the next session. When I started last year, I felt like I was already a year behind getting ready to go for the legislative session. So we've already started planning for that. And then I can also tell you, at a federal level, we are trying to do more to advocate for the region. I think all of these EDA investments that you continue to see and the discussions that we're having around transportation and things like that, they really are beneficial for the region. I know that our board really has more of a regional approach to everything and anything that we do. What's good for us is good for Las Cruces and is good for Juarez, and we all prosper when one of us does.
Now, you touched on this a little bit when I asked you about your first year.
Yeah.
And you mentioned partnerships, but what else have you taken away from your first year?
Sure. So I think, it's interesting. Last week, I was at the Association of Chamber of Commerce Executives, and one of the opportunities that I had was the chance to meet with, for several hours, and have dinner with the chamber CEOs in major metropolitan areas across the country. And I found that many of them are struggling with significant amounts of homelessness and significant amount of drug issues. And I realize that we do have those issues also in our region, but I can tell you that the extent is significantly less here. Obviously, they don't have as much to deal with when it comes to immigration, so we do have a little bit of different issues that we are dealing with here. But I can tell you, it sounds like, based on the most successful regions in the country, that we're doing a lot right. So when it comes to getting back to kind of our grassroots and doing advocacy and partnering with other organizations and being kind of the voice, if you will, for the business community, there seems to be a trend across the country that the business community is needing the Chamber of Commerce to get back to the basics when it comes to advocacy. And what I mean by that is, we talked a little bit earlier about the very partisan politics. When businesses go to work, especially if you're a small business, you're there to run your business. You don't have the time to, be watching city council meetings for 8 hours a day or checking in with what your state rep is doing. So they really do rely on associations and chambers to be that voice for them. I think there may have been a time where, nobody was really focused on that. Newspapers were doing a great job at kind of covering what was happening locally. And unfortunately, since not as many people invest in the media, plug there, we don't always have those folks that are out there and are able to bring the news on a local level. And so they do need those partnerships with the chamber where we can go in and advocate and watch for them and bring those issues to the forefront, but also then advocate with them for what real common sense solutions look like.
Andrea Hutchins is President and CEO of the El Paso Chamber of Commerce. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Moving on, the El Paso Museum of History hosted a Kicks camp this summer. This camp taught area students about art, culture, branding, and the history of sneakers. Carla Padilla, a local artist and entrepreneur, mentored the students and taught the class to design their own personalized sneakers on the last day of the camp. The students also had an opportunity to display their custom kicks in the El Paso Museum of History gallery, where family and friends visited to see their work. Our producer Evelyn Sandoval has more on this community connection.
So the title of our summer camp is called Kicks Camp, and basically it's about learning how to create your own shoes. And we did this camp specifically for leather shoes. There's different ways that you can approach whatever type of material the shoe is. But since with this specific shoe, we did a Nike shoe that's all leather. It really benefited the kids because they can go ahead and just explore their creativity, just encourage each other to really put whatever they truly want to put on there. No boundaries, no judgment, and they're just able to be creative and be themselves. The El Paso Museum of History reached out to me earlier in the year so that I can teach kids how to make their own one-of-one shoe here in the summer, mainly teenagers, so that they can go ahead and start to see what we can do here in the borderland and the surrounding areas. During the camp, I taught the students about a lot of the history with sneaker culture, where it started, how a lot of celebrities and big names were able to push out sneakers more towards the public. The sneaker culture has changed so much, so I was able to teach them that, and they can just see how much time has changed, how everything has evolved, and it just definitely was something that they were able to use as inspiration and to be able to hold on to whatever they need in the future.
You could just express yourself through like paintings that you make and stuff. I mostly just chose my favorite color, and I was wearing the shoes that I have on right now, and they have flowers, so I just decided to do something like that.
I've been customizing shoes for about 5 years now, so since 2018. The first year was super slow. Didn't get paid on some of them, just got 30 bucks, you know, starting out. As the years progressed, it took time. Honestly, it really did take time to like grow followers, to get more word of mouth, to get more clients, to get clients coming multiple times, which I do have a lot of clients that come back for more shoes, which I really appreciate. For those that are interested in shoes and art, or a little bit of both, go ahead and give me a follow at C-Dubs Customs. My grandma, I'll always speak about my grandma. She always started the journey very well. For me, it definitely went on to me, rubbed off on me. I believe this benefits the students. I believe it helps them become a lot more confident with themselves and whatever they're willing to produce, and that it's okay to fail, it's okay to try new things, it's okay to be scared, but as long as you get up and you go ahead and try and you see the result, and hey, maybe this is something I need to work on later, or you know what, I really like that I did this, and just to build that confidence is really great, because I feel like it's a lot of things that a lot of people lack confidence and being proud and having pride with what they put out, whatever they envision, and letting it come to fruition. So I believe that this helped them out a lot. It was a privilege and an honor to be working with them. It was a lot of fun.
3, 2, 1. All right, come on in.
The last day of the camp, the students were walking around looking at everyone's art, and everyone was just so happy with the outcome. It was just really beautiful. I think it's a really good environment and it brings a lot of good vibration. My future plans is definitely to expand way more, be very authentic. I've recently done 13 pairs of shoes. It was for the local high school here, Socorro High School, for the girls varsity basketball team. Being able to give back to the high schools and make them different, make them stand out. And it's just great because honestly, all of the shoes that I'm able to do and produce, there's such a great reaction that it just makes me want to do it way more.
That's it for our program. Remember, you can stay updated anytime with news at krwg.org. We're on social media as well. You can like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to KRWG Public Media on YouTube. I'm Anthony Moreno. We'll see you next time.